השעה 10:20, ה-7 ביוני, ברגע זה אנו עוברים.
Wow, good morning. This News for Life. I think we got here. Okay, I don't know if I see. We got the sound going. Uh, Let me see here. I don't see we got sound going here. Let me see. Just 1 second here. Um, so let me see here. Sound. Um, yeah, that should all be good. So testing 1, 2, 3. Testing. Testing. I don't see any. Oh, there we go. Okay, yeah. All right, so we're good. So, yeah, apologize for that. Thank you for tuning in this morning to News for Life. We are live this Friday morning, and I trust you're all having a wonderful morning. Boker Tov to wherever you are in the world. And oh, yeah, so while I think about it, I don't actually have the call-in phone number for the show. So let us maybe the producer Mark could add that into the chat. So if you do log in to the if you do log in via the YouTube channel, then you'll be able to see in the chat there. You'll be able to see the call-in phone number. And to go there, all you do is go to Messianic Lamb Radio, and then if you click on the banner on there, the fourth banner is going to be the YouTube one. Just click on that; it takes you straight to the YouTube, and then you'll see the News for Life. There is live, and you just click on that live feed, and then you'll be able to follow along because I'll show you some PowerPoints that we're going to discuss some of the topics there, and you'll be able to see it as we go through the news today. So anyway, thank you for tuning in. And breaking news this morning is the tensions are increasing dramatically over the Gaza disputes there in the they have been demonstrating there for about 7 months now, ever since Trump had moved the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and so that has been hitting the news, as well as this guy that was murdered in Turkey uh, under the someone from Saudi Arabia, or about 15 supposedly hitmen went there, and they took out this journalist that worked for the Washington Post. That's been in the news for well over a week now, and that is still hitting the news even this morning. Um, and then, of course, we've heard in the news that there is this caravan coming from Honduras, where these people say they're fleeing poverty and whatnot. And this huge caravan of well over 1,000 people are making their way to the United States border. The way I take it, they'll probably end up near the border of Texas. That would be the closest route. It's still a long way away. I believe it's like over 1,000 miles. So it's not like they're going to get there tomorrow. So there's some news headlines that we're going to take a look at, and anything else that might come to my mind as we go through the news. So let me share my screen with you so we can go through this. Let's go just over here. And so News for Life, what I like to do is focus on the news behind the news, which you're not really seeing on the mainstream news. And in the mainstream news, there's a lot of propaganda. So there's lots of things that are not always so good. So yeah, so what I can do is I can go here and show you what's going on here for Messianic Lamb Radio. Okay, so there's that. And let's go to the main site here. And so here's Messianic Lamb Radio. And I can blow this up so you can see a little better here. And by the way, thank you, ladies in the war room, for the intro to the show. Trust you had a wonderful morning. And it's always good to start the day with prayer. So here's the banners, and there's the YouTube, and you can see it right there. And of course, I've got the sound on here. So, that's the danger about going on there. And then I wonder why I got an echo. And then here you can see the live feed there. So anyway, so that's where you can see how to click on live. And then what I'll do is I got the chats here going as well. So we can follow along and see. And then also I've got the Facebook site for News for Life, which is right here. So if you go to type in News for Life on Facebook, you'll come to this site here, and we'll have also a lot of news for the day. And I've got a link here for the YouTube channel for Messianic Lamb Radio, as well as the latest news, of course. And so there's a good place here. If you see something in the news that you like, you're welcome to post it on this site, make comments and things like that. So let me go also let you see as we turn to the news for the day. And let's say we got to do the slideshow, and we're going to share this with you. And we'll start with the news in Israel, and it's looking rather serious there on the border. I've been following it for the last few days, and you don't see this in the news at all, and which is rather strange because normally the news likes to focus on anything negative, and especially the Palestinian plight has always been a big tool in the left's ammunition. And so it's amazing that they're not going after it. I'm not sure why, but I guess right now it doesn't suit them. But this has been going on for 7 months. And how much coverage have you seen? I haven't seen a whole lot of coverage on this. And it's just begs the question as to why. But there's Israeli tanks moving in today, surrounding the Gaza Strip. And they don't really do this unless they're ready to move in. And so they're even talking about diverting air traffic from away from there. Well, you'd only, Tel Aviv Airport is quite a way south. I mean, it's to the north of the Gaza Strip. And so for them to be able to, to require air traffic not to fly anywhere near that place, that means that they would probably be having military aircraft flying over there, making bombing raids. So that's something pretty serious, of course. And in the face of it all, last night, this is from yesterday, is that they were calling for more demonstrations. So the Hamas leadership in the Gaza Strip is all out calling for more and more demonstrations. And on a weekend, it's nothing for them to get over 10,000 or even as high as 20,000 protesters out there. But things are changing. Israel is thinking they're not going to tolerate this for much longer. So this is the leader of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh, however you pronounce his name. He says, "We won't be swayed by your half solutions and partial steps. The march won't end unless there is a complete lifting of the siege of Gaza. We appreciate any effort to lift the siege, whether it is by an Arab element or an international one." They'd love, if anything, to get international peace troops in there to govern the situation rather than have Israel. Well, the UN would love to get involved. America has always vetoed any attempts to do that. And so that's very unlikely to happen, especially with Trump taking a rather strong control over what happens there at the UN, that is. And so they're putting their foot down. That's from October 12th. That's what he just said through a few days ago, and so he's really remaining adamant. Now, I did say yesterday that it sounded like maybe they were trying to ask for a little bit of calm. Well, we'll find out today because today is Friday, so they have Friday prayers at the Islamic mosque in Gaza, and we'll see just exactly what happens here if they are really going to be serious about doing something or not, because this is normally, the day that they're going to come out in big numbers. So this is what the Israeli defense minister has said. He says, "We've turned every stone and we have passed to the point of no return. We have reached a stage where we must deliver the hardest blow imaginable on Hamas." So they've tried over the years. Of course, Hamas seized control. It wasn't, I believe, not long after Ariel Sharon had, under Bush, had been forced those Jewish settlers out of Gaza, that they actually found a way to get Hamas, which was just a radical Islamic sect, very violent military sect in Islam, that seized control through demographic. They say that they're that they were, democratically elected, but it's like either you vote for them or you could get shot. So it's like they seize control really by force, and they've been in power ever since. And if you remember, when they had moved out of those Jews from settlers in the Gaza Strip, that it was the day that they had finished removing them from Gaza, and they did it by as force, because Israeli soldiers had to move them out because they would never have moved out, except they did it under gunpoint. And so that was the day that actually Katrina formed in the Atlantic, and it hit. And the interesting fact is that there was very few Israeli settlers in Gaza, a small percentage of the total population, but that kind of represented the amount of people that were evacuated out of Katrina, a very small percentage of the American population that were forced to evacuate. And so it's like God says, well, hey, you're going to do that, then you'll pay a price for it, because under this auspices of what George Bush had done, he had really pushed for this. And so Ariel Sharon had done that. And if you remember, what happened is that Sharon had gone into a coma, and he never recovered for years. He was in a coma. I'm not sure if it was 2011 or 2010, somewhere where he eventually died. Might have been 2009. But anyway, that was pretty sad. So this is what Benjamin Netanyahu said on the 14th. He said Hamas has apparently not internalized the message. If they do not stop the violent attacks against us, they will be stopped in a different way, and it will be very, very painful. So they're fed up with it. So they have to. They convened yesterday and the day before. They had a special meeting in Jerusalem, and so they're taking this very seriously, and they're going to be doing something about it. And it's not looking too good. Now, the interesting thing about this is that Egypt has been trying to broker peace, or at least scaling down. That Israel and has been working, of course, with Egypt, and Egypt has been willing to intervene and try and get some peace going on in the Gaza Strip. And Egypt pulled out, because after all their attempts, they were down there. They sent an envoy to the Gaza Strip, and while the envoy was there, they were doing all these wild demonstrations, even fired some rockets on Israel. And so that's let me show you that. There's here's the house, which was destroyed by a missile that was flew from the Gaza Strip while the Egyptian envoy was there. So they just canceled negotiations, and Hamas was a bit upset with them because they pulled out. So even when a Muslim nation like Egypt, threatens to pull out of, assisting any of the talks, you would think that they would realize that they're really going to be left on their own. I mean, who's going to stand with them? And so they really are, being pushed into a corner. And it's not just Israel. I mean, Egypt agrees with Israel, saying, "Hey, how can we, how Egypt is thinking, how can we, continue to try to work out a solution when they're just, firing away rockets while we're there in the Gaza Strip?" They're afraid that their guy was going to get bombed with a retaliation, coming at them from Israel. So they thought that's a very dangerous and stupid thing to do. They were not happy at all. So they're pulling out there. And so we're going to see some real fireworks pretty soon if they don't change the way things are going. Here's Henry Gruver, and he had said, this is taken from the Z3 News site, and the author is James Bailey, and he came out this morning. This is Friday morning. He put this out just about an hour ago. He said, when Israel sends troops into Gaza, that will be a prophetic sign revealing the Middle East war has started. Well, there's been many times that Israel has entered into the Gaza Strip. And so he believes that this would be a prophetic sign of the Middle East war. Well, if the Middle East war, from a biblical perspective, is going to be where all the nations are gathered against Israel, it's so sad to see so many people misunderstand what's really going on in Israel, and they just do not understand. So what the scriptures say, a lot of them are very anti-Semitic, and a lot of Christians these days, in the last 10, 12 years, I've seen a remarkable move on the conservative side of politics in the United States, turning their back on Israel. And they actually say that they're just a Rothschild state and they're a satanic state. And they have all these things that they say that you're a Zionist if you're supporting Israel and this and that. Well, Z3 News, as I was just pointing out there, he did a study on this, and he found 40 scriptures that all speak clearly, like this one, of the return of God's people to Israel. So let's take a look. So it says, God's promise to Israel in verse 14 of chapter 9 of Amos. It says, also, I will restore the exile who were formerly taken in captivity of my people Israel, and they will rebuild the ruined cities and live in them. They will also plant vineyards and drink their wine and make gardens and eat their fruit. I will also plant them on their land, and they will not again be rooted out of their land, which I have given them, says the Lord your God. So that is Amos 9. Has that been fulfilled? All right. Well, obviously it hasn't, because that hasn't been fulfilled because they've been rooted out. They, in fact, only just returned to the land in the last 100 years. So that's not been fulfilled. So that's one of the 40 scriptures that he found. All right. And that's proof positive. It still has to be fulfilled. All right. So then what these anti-Zionist people say, because what they're doing is they're talking about replacement theology, where they say the church has replaced Israel. Well, I don't know how they can come to this conclusion. If obviously they're not reading their scriptures. Here Amos is pretty clear. This has not been fulfilled. This has to be fulfilled. And then we've got Romans, a good explanation. You got to read Romans 9, 10, and 11. And you'll see there very clearly, where Paul says, how long, that they would receive the gospel. He says, they're enemies of the gospel, but for the sake of the patriarchs, they are beloved, because to them was the gospel, the word of God entrusted with them. And so he says they are beloved. And then he goes on to say what their future shall be. And he said, well, yeah, so there's been a hardening in part, and they were blinded. And we could go through those scriptures another time, perhaps. But he said that there was a blinding in part, but he says until the times of the Gentiles has been fulfilled. And that's been a question as to, Now, of course, this was written, Romans was written, say, in about 50, 60, 70 AD or something like that. I don't know off the top of my head. And so, anyway, so if it was written then, obviously it hadn't been fulfilled in his day, and he was talking about the times when the Gentiles would be fulfilled, that they would be returned and reestablished in the land. He's taught. So some people say God doesn't have two covenant people. Well, quite clearly, there's no other way to read Romans except to understand that there is a remnant of Jews that believed. So in Acts, we can see 1,000. Just on Acts 2, we see 3,000 Jews come to believe in Yeshua. And then after that, there was many others that also came to believe. And so there is tens of thousands of believers that came to believe in Yeshua. And so these were a remnant, but for the vast majority of the, so let me see here. Let me check my screen. I had this blocking here. Oh no, so we're good. So the vast majority of Jews obviously did not receive the gospel of Yeshua and receive him as their Messiah. But so there is so those texts there. So I was just checking. I want to keep track of the text, and so I'm watching on here. So in case any of you have any questions, I have to put this on my other screen because this is so small. I don't know why this is. So I can see some text there, but my goodness, it's like so tiny. I wonder if I can make this larger. I'm not sure if I can blow this up anymore. I don't know if I can or not. So I apologize for that. So I was just trying to see if I couldn't make this larger because I see some text there, but they're so small. If you put any text, put it on the YouTube Hangouts here. Put text here because I can see this nice and large, and then I can keep track of your text here. And I think this is going to be what's also anybody's going to be texting me on YouTube. I'll be able to see that right down here on this side. That is YouTube if you want to see the comments. Okay. All right. So anyway, so I can see these texts here. So my producer Mark's just letting me know to keep an eye on the text there. Those texts there on that side, I can't see. They're so small. So if you have James Gale, so if you could put any of those texts there on to this side here where I put on there here, then I can see what's going on. So, and also if you don't mind, Mark, if you could put on there the call-in phone number, and I'll announce that because I don't know if you've done that earlier on this other side here where you're on TeamViewer. That's on my screen. I've got that very small because I'm sharing my big screen for the PowerPoint, so I can't put it up on the big screen, and so that's pretty small. Oh, there it is there. Yeah, Mark, can you move it to the other side? Like over here, or you're not seeing this part here. So if I put it here, so I'm not sure if you see that. So anyway, let's move it along with the PowerPoint here. So let's go pull up this here. All right, so now I always have a real estate problem when you've got so many things going on. Okay, so now, so this here. So what happened was that there was some bombing that they had done in response to some of the protests that they were getting out of hand. And then, so since yesterday, after the bombing happened on, I believe it was Wednesday, that they did decide to try to calm the people down some. But yeah, I don't see that would happen today as they are just beginning their Friday prayers. That's normally when they get all excited and they go out there and they start their massive protests. So we'll have to wait and see if anything does come of this. Um, so if you can see here, this was on YouTube this morning. You can see it's got October the 19th date there. And so you can see that this is very serious. I mean, this Israeli soldier here, he's got his bed right here. So, so I mean, they're telling you they're taking this very seriously. He is on the battlefield, um, and he's got his bed with him. So that's so let me see. I'll get my pointer going here so that you can see. Let me see if I do the other pointer, it might work better. So so anyway, so you can see here he's sitting right next to his tank, and that's his bed. That's where he sleeps. Trust me, he's not sleeping in a tent. He's sleeping out in the open. He might have a little fly to put over that in case it does rain. But yeah, so that is where he's at. A lot of the soldiers there. There's hundreds of these tanks that are out there. Let's go see what else we got as far as that goes. Um, Look at all these tanks here. This is from yesterday and today. So there's the M113 armored carriers, uh, and they're all deployed near the Gaza Strip. So they're troop carriers and tanks that have just arrived yesterday and today. So things are really heating up. And normally you won't see this unless they're really seriously considering an invasion. As you can see, the date right here, that's October 19th. So that's today. This just happened. It's brand new, just out on the news. But you're not going to see it on the mainstream news. I don't know why they're not talking about it, but it's maybe they will, especially if they start moving the troops in, moving the tanks in. Israel hates to do that, but they, like I showed you, they're fed up with the way things have been going, and how the news is this is so biased. So see here where we've got you know, Twitter for example, you've got Louis Farrakhan, and he is, uh, very say you might call this hate speech, even though I don't like to use that term. But so he's referring to um, he's referring to the Jews as termites. So none of this has been responded. Oh dear. So well, what I can do is, yeah, I can play a piece here, and I can show you some news. Just wait 1 second. So we'll go here. So let me take a coffee break here. But anyway, so what I wanted to show you here was that, uh, you know, here Louis Farrakhan's allowed to refer to Jews as termites, and while Twitter and YouTube and Google are happily shadow banning and blocking and shutting down conservative sites, as what's his name? Oh, that guy. He's trying to run for Speaker of the House. What's his name? Is it Jim? I forget what his name is, but he was saying just last night, I think it was, that he said, well, if he said that he said, why is it that only the conservatives of all the members of the House and the Senate, of all the people that were censored by Twitter and YouTube, that were shadow banned and censored, it was conservatives. And they said, oh, that was just a mistake and it was just a problem with the algorithm. Oh, yeah. Well, how come that was hitting on these conservatives and it wasn't affecting any of the Democrats? Of course, they're all from Silicon Valley, Twitter and YouTube and Google. And so Google owns YouTube, of course. And of course, Facebook. They're all in Silicon Valley, which is 99%, honestly, like it really is seriously one liberal valley that they're the ones that are censoring. And I've heard experts I don't know if I've got that anywhere on file, but they're saying that, well, Congress shouldn't intervene. Oh, I think they should. They're in the public. So Twitter is a public vehicle for news, and so you can't be discriminating. Why should they be allowed to? Why is Twitter allowed to discriminate and allow this anti-Semitic speech, but they won't allow us to have our First Amendment rights to talk and expose the crimes that's going on in the world or in America? They just don't like to hear things from a biblical perspective or from a conservative perspective. And so they like to censor us. Well, that's not right. So anyway, so let's see here. So I got this piece here that I'd like you to listen to, and I'll be right back after.
There were women that were wearing full-face burqas. They were covered. There were small children that were women in the group. Their faces were covered as well. There was bearded men. And if anybody wants to try and say, I don't know what I'm talking about, I've got 2 pumps to Iraq. I've been to Fallujah in 06, Ramadi 07, Baghdad, the whole 9 yards, the whole area. So I know how to pick separate from your illegals crossing to Muslims crossing. You got Muslims crossing into the border. When Obama was in, say what you want about him, but they were allowed to fly in through the airport. When they're coming over the border this far south, that tells you something. And when they're mixed in with children and immigrants, that tells you something right there. That tells you something right there. I didn't see a word about it on the news the next day. I didn't see nothing about it on the news the next day. And that to me is troublesome and bothersome, because you've got Haji moving in down here on the southern border, and it's not being talked about. All the more reason we need that wall. Look at that. Look at that, America. Look. Ain't nobody can just hop over that little bitty fence right there.
Okay, just wait. I'm going back live. Yeah, so anyway, so like I wanted to let me replay this last piece here. So let me see. Oh yeah, so let me see. Okay, yeah. 1 second. Well, now we got it frozen up a bit. Well, okay, all right. Okay, there we go. We're back. We're back on here.
There were women that were wearing full-face burqas. They were covered. There were small children that were women in the group. Their faces were covered as well. There was bearded men. And if anybody wants to try and say, I don't know what I'm talking about, I've got 2 pumps to Iraq. I've been to Fallujah in 06, Ramadi 07, Baghdad, the whole 9 yards, the whole area. So I know how to pick separate from your illegals crossing to Muslims crossing. You got Muslims crossing into the border. When Obama was in, say what you want about him, but they were allowed to fly in through the airport. When they're coming over the border,
that's like
as far south,
that
tells you something. When they're mixed in with children and immigrants, that tells you something right there. That tells you something right there. I didn't see a word about it on the news the next day. I didn't see nothing about it on the news the next day. And that to me is troublesome and bothersome, because if you've got Haji moving in down here on the southern border, and it's not being talked about, all the more reason we need that wall. Look at that. Look at that, America. Look. Ain't nobody can just hop over that little bitty fence right there.
Yeah, so that is what's happening on the southern border, and I wanted to talk to you guys about that. But so let me just wrap up here with the with what's going on with Israel. Is so as you can see on the West Bank, well, there's Gaza down there, and then you've got the West Bank territory. There's so many people that do not understand that they actually believe that Israel needs to move back to the 67 borders. And there's lots of Americans that really believe that. Well, they really are truly do not understand international law. Now, I'll go into depth on this so that people will just have that they will not be able to refute it, and because I can argue this from a historical perspective, is that just like, say, for instance, in America, we took, say, New Mexico, and we reimbursed the well, you want to call them Hispanics or whatever that were living there, the Indians that were living there, and we paid them for the land. And so New Mexico and even Southern California. And so there's some talk that that Mexico wants to take back those lands. Well, they can't, because they were now, some were fought under a war that happened over 100 years ago. And so that was a war that happened, and the victor was the American forces. And it's always happened that always the victor of war took the spoils of war. Now, there's also another international law which says that if the aggressor loses the battle, then, of course, in this case, we're talking about the Arabs, where they, in 1948, when Israel in December 9th had declared themselves, or had been declared on the United Nations, or the League of Nations at the time, that they would have the right to become a nation, which that never happened until about 6 months later, on June the 14th, I believe it is. But then right away, the Arabs started rising up and started attacking Jews. And so what happened was, particularly like the day in May, that's when they declared themselves a nation. That was when the Arabs went out full force, and they formed an army, to wipe them out. And then you had Egypt as well, trying to attack, and they were going to try to take over Tel Aviv on behalf of all the Arabs, which had, a lot of the local Arabs had called them Palestinians, which is just an error. What happened was, after the Jews were pushed out of the land in, say, like you had 70 AD, and then later on you had like 135 AD. Well, the Romans then had changed the name of the land of Israel to Palestine to insult the Jews. Well, rightfully so, because Yeshua had promised and prophesied that not one stone would be left upon the other, for what the sins of Israel were going to have to pay the price. And the consequence was that they'd be thrown out of the land, which was talked about way back in Moses' day. So if they didn't obey God, that they would be thrown out of the land. And that's exactly what happened. Now, the believers that followed Yeshua knew all of this, because he warned them in Matthew 23:24, and they were all well aware of this. And so it said, when you see Jerusalem surrounded, you to flee to the hills. Don't have time to go into the house and get your things. You just take off. And so what happened when they saw Jerusalem surrounded, the siege, which lasted about 4 years, the believers in Yeshua, they left. And so then what happened was, you ended up having a animosity between the Jews that didn't follow Yeshua and those that did, because the Jews that didn't follow Yeshua, they saw that the believers in Yeshua were traitors. Well, no, they were obeying what Yeshua had told all of Israel to do. And so it's just the rebellious ones didn't want to follow what Yeshua said, and so they didn't want to flee to the hills. No, they want to stay and fight. And apparently, more people died in these battles because they were killed by Jews who were killing people who were trying to flee. That's apparently what the true story is. And so anyway, so that's where the name Palestine came from. And then, of course, the Palestinians, as supposedly, are supposed to be these people that have lived there for the last 2,000-3,000 years, which is absolutely not true. What happened was, you started in the 1890s and the turn of the century, 1905, 1910, 1915, and especially like after the war, you had the Balfour Treaty, and which lasted several years, where they actually gave Israel a place to live. And so if you know that scripture, it says that first he'll send out fishermen and then he'll send out hunters. Well, the fishermen went out there and they invited them to move to Israel. By the way, even as far back as 1860, the Turkish Empire, which is the Ottoman Empire, which controlled the entire Middle East for 400 years, by the way, they allowed Jews to own property in Jerusalem. back in the 1860s. Okay, so there's some real heritage here that we know for a fact that Jews did own properties in Israel, going back 100 and what is that, 150 years or more. So there's a long history there. And then what happened was, as they began to settle the coastal areas, which were just, you know, swamps, and nobody was really paying much attention to the land there, is that you had that they wanted to, you know, to put, you know, say orange trees and orchard, build orchards there and mandarins and stuff like that. So they needed workers. And so what happened was, this was like over 150 years ago, or 100 odd years ago, because yeah, it's about 100 years ago. They were doing all of this farming on the coastal areas, you know, basically from Gaza all the way up through Haifa and north, you know, towards Lebanon. So they were cultivating the coastal areas. Many of them died because it was, you know, infested with swamps and stuff, and they got malaria. But so these pioneers, they had to reclaim the land so it could become, you know, good fertile farmland after it had been neglected under the Ottoman Empire for centuries. And so what they did, they employed these Arabs, and a lot of these Arabs came from Egypt, and they came from other places like Jordan and Lebanon. I think quite a few ended up coming from Lebanon. And so, by the way, so some people claim that they are the, I would say, when Israel went into the promised land, it was the Hittites and the Jebusites and all those ites that lived there. And so it turns out, from a little bit of study that I've done, is that there are some relatives, as particularly Lebanese, that seem to date back from that time period. And so you know, so those are possible. So some people say that the Palestinians are those, and then some other people say no, the Palestinians are actually Jews, the true Jews that lived there 2,000 years ago, because some of them, they actually have records that date back over 800 years, and before that they don't have records, but they believe that they've always lived there, and they were Christians. You know, Christians, like there's a lot of Christians that are in Lebanon, as you might know. So, so that's a bit of the history of it. And so the fact is that Arabs that lived in Palestine, as it was called, and by the way, all the Jews that lived there before 1948, they had a passport that said Palestine. They were proud to be Palestinian. If you go back and find the documents all on there, you'll find that the Jews had been, say, born in Palestine. Okay, so who's a true Palestinian? Well, a lot of Jews were true Palestinians. Of course, once in 1948, once they became a nation, they were prouder to say that they were Israel. Of course, they'd rather go by that name. But there's a bit of confusion there, especially by the Western media that likes to ignore this historical facts that cannot be denied. I could go into that in more detail. But what I was saying was that as they had fought these battles, they had lost. They started attacking the Jews, which were given 10% of the land, and 90% of the land was given to the so-called Palestinians. And what happens was the Palestinians attacked, and then they fled their homes and properties, as you can see, like in all this green area here on the what's called the West Bank, and that was controlled by Jordan up until 1967. And then you can there's like a very small sector, which I don't have that on a map right now, where the Jews were going to live in. It's just like 10%, tiny strip along the coast, and a little bit towards Jerusalem. And what happened was the Arabs attacked, and so what happened was the entire areas of Jaffa and Tel Aviv, they all became under Jewish control. Why? Because they were attacked by the Arabs, and they won. So that's law. That is international law, that if you were the victim and the aggressor came to attack you and you defeated them, then you took their land. And so that is absolutely undisputable. And then so what happened in 1967, some years later, was that again, you had a war with Egypt, Jordan, and Syria, and even Iraq, and Russia was helping as well. And then you had this attack. And by the way, the KGB was involved with creating the PLO. And it said that one KGB agent that came to America in 2004 had said that the KGB had founded the PLO, and they appointed an Egyptian, Yasser Arafat, to head it. So that was on purpose, to stir up unrest. And it was a Russian idea, not a Palestinian idea. And so you've got Abbas right now. He's the leader of the PLO, and he's aging, and he's getting pretty unwell. He's not doing too good health-wise, and there's some successors that are trying to take over from. But he's the guy who took over from Yasser Arafat. So that's a bit of the history and the background to it. And the West Bank, I lived in Israel back in 1991, 92, and 93. I was there for almost a year, actually. So, but what I would say to them is, I said, no, all this land belongs to you, because in 1967, they were attacked, and they told Jordan to stay out of this war because they had their hands full with being attacked by Syria and Egypt. And what did Jordan do? They said, no, we're going to attack. Jordan was right bang where all this green is, that like everything west of that dotted line there. So you can see this here. So that is this was all Jordan, including the old city of Jerusalem. That was the walls of the old city of Jerusalem were controlled by Jordan. And so they went to war with Israel, and Israel defeated them, knocked them out, and won. And as they were pulling out, the Jordanians were destroying synagogues after synagogues that were in the old city. Why are there synagogues in the old city if there weren't Jews there? Obviously, there were Jews there, and they were taking back some of their land that they had lost control of. By the way, so just so you know, it doesn't say that when God gathers his people back that they're going to be faithful to him. No, he says, remember the Valley of Bones in Ezekiel? And then he gathers the bones, and God says to the prophet Ezekiel, do you believe that these bones can live? And the prophet says, oh, well, only you would know that. And so when he gathered them back together, they weren't alive until the very last moment when he put flesh on them. They still were not alive. They looked like, they were living, breathing people, but they were still not alive spiritually. They remained dead until he breathed in them. Then they became a living people. This is what we're seeing today. We're seeing in the last, 70 years. We just celebrated the 70th anniversary a few months ago. So we've had 70 years where, also in Matthew 24, where it says that when you see the fig tree begin to blossom, you know that summer is near. That doesn't mean that everything's fulfilled. You see the leaves come on the tree. Oh, it looks like it's alive, but you don't have any fruit yet. So there's no fruit in Israel. So it's a rather wicked place still. But if you understand, that does not mean that God is not doing this restoration. And it absolutely argue that it is not a Rothschild state, because I know in 1948, the Rothschilds were not helping Israel win the war there against them. So that is absolutely not the case at all. So that's I just wanted to point that out there, that there's so much that is misunderstood about the history of Israel and what's going on with and their right to the land. And this two-state solution will not work, and I totally disagree with it. And for those reasons I just laid out, and I just also disagreed with them pulling out of Gaza too. And you can see, I think we didn't do too well after that. And in fact, every time we interfered, going back the last 20, 30, 40 years, it's been not too good for us. You can go, back to the 90s under Bill Clinton. Things didn't go well for us when we tried to force peace on the land and to divide the land. So this land should not be divided. And just like we're not giving back New Mexico to Mexico, and just like we're not giving back Southern California, although Jerry Brown is trying everything he possibly can. Jerry Brown will be arrested shortly, hopefully. So therefore that, there's no way in my mind that anything like a two-state solution will work, because that says that they have a right to self-determination. They have the right to their own state and their own government. But hey, as you can see, when they've been told over and over by Israel that, hey, you got to stop this violence, and because they're trying to come into Israel. Well, Israel says, hey, we're going to stop fuel coming into Gaza because you won't stop the violence on your border. So they put them under a lot more strain, but they're asking for it. They're inciting their people in the numbers of 10 to 20,000 to go out there every weekend and to cause trouble with Israel. So actually, yesterday's meeting between the security chiefs had come out, and they've said that yeah, they're going to increase the buffer zone from that fence, so they can't even get close to the fence, or they could find themselves being repelled back and even possibly shot at. So, because they're, risk they get close to the fence so that they could, throw, fiery incendiary devices at the Israeli troops, and so they're threatening the lives of them, and so they try to do everything possible to get rid of this situation here, so where they can calm things down with, say, tear gas and whatnot, crowd dispersion techniques that the Israeli government has given the military to use. And if that doesn't work, they're allowed to use lethal force. And of course, a number of Palestinians have died over the last few weeks, last 7 months, in fact. But this is nothing new. This has been going on for many years. And so, but I'm just saying, this is really coming to a front. And it's pretty serious. So let's say here. So that's some of the crowds that they get there, and you got the border fence there, which is almost every weekend on a routine basis, where they're really going out there, causing these problems. So things have been getting out of hand, and that's Israel's given not much choice but to do something there to try to take back control. By the way, so here is recently they've been tracking this for a while, but they just made it known about a week ago about this tunnel that goes on from Gaza. It actually goes about 2 miles in, and it comes about 600 feet into Israel. So what they could do is they could sneak into Israel, grab a few Israelis, kidnap them, and then take them right back into these tunnels, take them into Gaza, and then Israel wouldn't know where to find them. And because these tunnels, they were sort of sporadic, and they had different places where they could exit, and they actually ran about I guess about 2 miles, or maybe even 3 miles. And so they could pop up in different places along there. So when you saw those bombs I showed you earlier, that one of those, some of those bombings were to destroy these tunnels. And all this is paid for by aid that America's been giving the Palestinians. We've got to really think twice before we give these people money, because they're not using it in the ways that we might expect them to use it. So there it is. That's the word of God there. And that's why Israel is there today. It doesn't mean that they're a holy and God-fearing people, but this is, you can see that's the old city. That this was all under Jordanian control. In the background, you see the new city of Jerusalem. In the foreground, you see the Temple Mount with the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and right below that is the Wailing Wall. And I used to rent a house. Right somewhere about here, inside the old city. It was just like a couple rooms in the basement of a house in the Armenian Quarter, right behind Christchurch. If any of you know that, as you go in through Jaffa Gate. How many people have lived in the old city? Huh? I lived there for several months, and in the end, we were forced out. We were told we were not allowed to rent the place anymore because they were afraid we stirred up too much trouble there, because they knew we were believers. So that was going back 25 years ago. So let's go take a look at some of these other things here. So this here is, I just played you that soundbite which is what's going on down by the. So this guy here, he fought in Iraq and everything, and he's telling a story there on what you just heard. That was this guy talking, and he was explaining how Muslims were coming across. So I showed you this picture here. I took this clip. I want you to see this here. So you can see there's a car here. See that car there? That's in Mexico. Now, you know that wall that Trump wants to put up? That's going to replace this fence. So people can crawl under that fence. There's not even wire there. They can just crawl underneath it or step over it. And so what they're doing is they're dropping off these, illegal immigrants here on the highway. They run about 200 feet or 200 yards or so, and then they come to this fence, and then they keep on walking right into America. And he was saying that they're told that Phoenix is just over the hill. Well, it's not. It's a desert you got to walk through, and most people die on their way through to Phoenix. It's a long, long, long way. But this is a highway that runs through here in Mexico, and they can just drop people off here. And then, so you've got this guy over here, and he's this guy here on the right. He's part of a group that's called Veterans for the Border and stuff like that. So they go there and they try to make some busts and stuff, and they sort of keep the government informed as to what's going on. But in here, he was admitting that people coming across the border, and they're actually coming across the border to bringing a lot of children with them. Oh, let me see if I got some clips of children. Actually, I don't see any. I don't know why. Maybe I got some in it. Oh, wait a minute. Here's another clip. And some of these were Muslims, and they're actually wearing burqas. The women were. Here's, I don't know if that's one or not. This is at night, of course. And so he said he could see them at night, and they would turn on their flashlights for a little bit, and then they would turn them off, and then they would come in. And so what they found is they're bringing in all these illegals. And by the way, this is from last week. This is actually from this week. All right. So this is not old. These are not old photos. This is from this week, where they're actually bringing these people in right at this time. And so this is you think Trump was talking about the reduction in the illegals coming across the border. He hasn't mentioned that the last few months because they've had increases, not decreases. And we've got this crazy policy, which Washington is, the GOP controls the House and the Senate, and there's no excuse why they haven't changed the policy of catch and release. So what they do is they'll detain these illegal immigrants, and then they'll set a court date for 2 or 3 years out, and they'll just release them into the public. And what happens to the children is they would just be turned over to CPS, foster care, and some churches would be then looked after. And some churches were being paid about $30,000 a year or more per person. This is not in the media. Why is this not in the media? They're being paid a huge amount of money. Say like one church in California, and it just so happens that these are all in Democrat states. So these are not churches. These are like, criminal churches. And they're getting paid millions of dollars every year by the government for supposedly looking after children. And then we know how the Catholic Church has been, involved with the molestation of children and the abuse of children. Well, that's why a lot of these children are ending up. And they weren't coming across here with some, of course, come with their parents. Some do not come with their parents, and they're just kidnapped, and then they're taken across the border here, and they have what he calls this guy who was reporting this. He said they're sponsors. He said, but some of these sponsors are pedophiles. So says, imagine that. We're allowing these immigrants to come in, and then we're allowing the children to be turned loose and to be handed over to these known pedophiles. And then also some of these illegals are being used. They're promised a better life and everything. Of course, some of them do get a better life. We've got something like 30 million here. And so some of them have done pretty well for themselves. But many of them have been turned over, promised work, and they end up working in some chicken factory somewhere up in Minnesota or wherever, and they might get a few dollars a day, and so they're actually, used in slave labor camps in the United States. And who's going to complain about it? Because these people do not exist. They're illegals. They're here illegally. They don't exist. Legally, they're not really here. And so we need to do something about it. Trump is trying to do something about it. And like this guy here who's really upset, when you can hear how upset he was talking about it. And he's saying that we need to do something about this because it's a serious, serious problem. And I mean, look at that. That's not a fence. And so we do need to build a fence there. So anyway, Humane Borders, an organization which leaves water and food for food drops for these illegal immigrants all up and down the road of the north, is leaving more than water and food. They collect backpacks, boots, shoes, and soap, medicines, etc., and leave drops along the way, explaining the large piles of clothes always found in a trafficking route. Trafficking means that they've got these parentless children that are being trafficked into the United States. The immigrants get a drop of the new clothes and the medicine. What these groups, these volunteers, are really dropping off for them, giving them water where they were like dying of thirst. They found groups that had no water at all, and but they should never have been here. And what these groups are saying, look, they're here. We need to make sure they don't die of thirst. That's just the humane thing to do. But they would rather see a wall put up rather than a see-through fence you could just step over or duck underneath. And so they're leaving their dirty clothes scattered in piles. And they said this must stop. Humane Borders makes it possible for the coyotes to abuse these women and children, ensuring that they have what they need to make the trip, enabling the evil things done along these trails. So just saying, it's a horrific story. It's very sad and it's very dark, and it's got to stop. But why is it not stopped under Obama? Because they were really involved with a lot of this going on there. So here's another one. It says, I spoke with the Border Patrol agents about my own investigations, and Border Patrol stated that some of the sponsors for these children coming here from for asylum are not always legit. Some children end up with sex offenders. So that's what is just a sad story. So this is another website which you can actually go to find more about it. CustomInc.com fundraisers by Paul Flores. He put out this video. He's got a video all about this, which I just showed you a clip from. And so it says the harsh reality of human and child trafficking is that these immigrant women and children are subjected to the torturous trip through a hostile environment and only to be abused along the trail by coyotes. Coyotes are the ones that they pay to take them over, and then they're the ones that abuse them. And it's rather graphic, the things that they find out what they've been done. But it's, I'll leave that for you to understand that it's not good at all what's happening there. If a child is lucky enough to make the trip, and it is the unaccompanied minors that are put into the child sex slave industry, a good portion of the children come here seeking asylum and having a sponsor waiting here if the child can get here through the coyotes. So in other words, if they survive, they may not survive half the time, but they get abused along the way. As confirmed by the Border Patrol, some of these sponsors are registered pedophiles, leaving one to wonder how they can sponsor a foreign illegal immigrant child and what will happen to that child if they actually survive the journey. The reality is that this cartel dumps these people at the border simply because they do not want them here, and they tell them that Phoenix is just over that mountain with the thought of a better life for the children in mind, and they start the tedious hike only to realize that sometimes when it's too late that the Phoenix is not there and now they have a battle for their lives against the harsh elements of the Arizona desert. Just some of the realities that's going down on the border today. This is not, in the past. The Muslim women in burqas were to the left behind the BP truck. Apparently, there was a BP truck there, and the group also had bearded males and intermingled within, according to X-Man. X-Man is this guy that I showed you the picture of right here. And so that's X-Man right here. He was doing the talking in that audio that I just showed you, that played. And that's what he was saying, is that he saw all these Muslims. These Muslims are coming in today. Now, of course, what was happening under Obama is Obama was just flying these illegal Muslims into the country and dropping them in states without even notifying the governors of what was going on. And they were using the Catholic Church and some other churches to bring them in and to find places, to house them. And so it was all done by stealth, unlawfully, and without the permission of the governors. And so that has stopped now. And then now, you've heard about this group, these Hondurans that are coming over, and they're trying to, they're trying now to come over here. But anyway, so Trump, the latest, what you heard, I don't know if you heard this on the news, but Trump has really been coming down hard on these countries, and he says, "Hey, we're going to stop." They get $200 or $300-400 million in aid, and so he says, "Well, we're going to cancel the aid if you don't stop these illegals, coming towards America in Honduras or Guatemala or Mexico. We're going to put sanctions on you. We're going to stop, giving you our aid, because we supply them with lots of food and stuff like that every year." So these governments have a choice now, and apparently yesterday or just this morning or last night, Mexico has come out and said that they will not be allowing them to traverse through their country. So Trump is making some progress with what's been going on there. And so let me see here. So there's been a real double standard which has been going on. So I just want to play this clip here. Let me see if we come across here. Here we go. And take a listen to this.
I think we can enforce our borders. I think we should enforce our borders. To have a situation where 40% of the babies born on Medicaid in California today are born of illegal immigrants creates a very real problem for the state, which is in deficit.
Look, of course you can enforce the borders.
Let me finish.
I agree.
To have 17% of our prison population at a cost of $300 million a year be illegal immigrants who come here and commit felonies. That's not what this nation is all about.
This is really hilarious. That was what she had said in 1994, Dianne Feinstein. And now the Democrat Party has turned into, really the Democrat Party is really breaking a lot of laws, and they could be easily labeled under U.S. law as a terrorist organization, because what they're promoting is for a borderless state. That is against the Constitution. I don't know if you're aware of that, but when you swear an oath of office and when you become a senator, you are there to uphold the laws of the United States. So you're not just violating your oath, but it's actually treasonous to promote. It's against U.S. law that if you're promoting, it's insurrection, and perhaps treasonous if you're working with foreign entities to break down our borders. So it's in the very least it's insurrection, which is a jail sentence, and if it's treason, it's a death sentence. So these people now it's become the main platform, and it never was. There's 1994, and she's just arguing what the GOP is arguing now. Conservatives are arguing for this. And this is what she was saying just a few years ago. And of course, now, that they're not saying that. So they've completely moved off the reservation, and they've really become radicalized. And how anyone can vote Democrat in the midterms now is just beyond me. I think there's lawful ways to sanction the Democrat Party for sure. Take a listen to this.
Self-fulfilling prophecy. You demonize, and then we call it the wrap-up smear. If you want to talk politics, call it the wrap-up smear. You smear somebody with falsehoods and all the rest, and then you merchandise it. And then you write it, and they'll say, see, it's reported in the press that this, and this. So they have that validation that the press reported the smear, and then it's called the wrap-up smear. Now I'm going to merchandise the press's report on the smear that we made. And it's a tactic, and it's self-evident. But I think
Yeah, so that's what there she is, Nancy Pelosi admitting that they're doing these campaigns to smear, and they leak it to the press, and then they use the press to corroborate their story. So they have a fake story, they leak it to the press, and then it sounds like it's legitimate because the New York Times will print almost anything. And then it sounds like they got some legitimacy going on, but it's just a smear tactic that they have. And they actually come out publicly. Look at her. This is where she said it. She said this during a C-SPAN public meeting. It's like crazy. Like how crazy can you get? So if they're going to be this blatant, admitting guilt to these things, these tactics that are very underhanded, and I believe they're against the law of the United States. And so therefore, we need to find out why Jeff Sessions hasn't been doing more about that. Of course, there's a lot more I can say about that. But so that is, the sad case of events. What's going on here is that, the things in the Democrat Party have just really gone out of hand. Hillary, I do not want to really play what she says, but I just let you know that she's saying that, we can't be civil anymore because until we gain power. So in other words, it's blackmail. Okay, so we'll become civil. So we'll stop all this nonsense when you vote us back into power. All right? Are Americans that stupid? I mean, how stupid are we? So we're going to say, okay, we hate all this division. There isn't division. There's like a noisy few million Democrats that are fanatics and going off the reservation. They're not even Democrats anymore. Like I just showed you. She's not even acting like Dianne Feinstein is not even acting like she did 20 years ago. So they are not, they've just become militant, and they're weaponizing their public office. You cannot do that. That's you've made an oath to the United States. You can't violate that oath, and that's what they're doing. And that's what they're doing, and it's really sad to see. So let's say on a lighter note, what have I got here? Let me play this for you.
Do you want a brother or a sister?
Puppy.
A puppy?
There's food everywhere.
Oh no.
I got to clean it up before the ladies come.
Oh, thank
So I've got this little clip here from the children, and they say some amazing things. Take a listen to some of the things that these toddlers they're barely like 2 or 3 years old.
Thanks, buddy. Can I have a bite of that, please?
It's not yours. Not yours.
Listen, I don't take sassy girls in the store with me.
I don't take naughty mamas in the store either. When I grow up, I'm gonna grow up and be big. Play a tuba.
How old are you?
40
How old are you?
and 40.
Maddie, do you love Daddy?
I love Justin Bieber.
Do you love Mommy?
Yeah. No.
So anyway, so that's I could play a bit more of that next week. I'm running out of time here, so but I just wanted you to see that there's some really cute things some of the children say, and sometimes it's helps you to keep your sanity to focus on some of the lighter things, as we talked about some pretty heavy, nasty things that are going on in the world today. And I never mentioned a few things that are really disturbing. Again, Russia is very concerned about a World War III possibility. And so what's his name? The military general Lavrov was saying that he said he really hopes that the world can see that the nuclear war is not an option. And then Putin came out and he says, yeah, so if we are attacked, in other words, nuked, so if they're sleeping and they get attacked by nuclear weapons, he says, it's okay because we'll go to heaven. Because, by the way, like I mentioned before, is that in Russia today, all educational systems must teach the Bible. And there's a lot more Christians in Russia than you would know. And they are not the atheist state that they used to be prior to the perestroika, which Gorbachev had left, leaving the Cold War behind. And so they have really they've got a new constitution, and they're not the boogeyman that they're supposed to be, like the media wants you to say. If you listen to Marco Rubio, they're blood murderous thugs. Well, why is it that it's always Russia that's appealing to people not to start a nuclear war? In the last few years, and I can play some clips that show you this, is that he's been appealing year after year. Obama was stacking up on the borders of NATO, more armaments and more troops and missiles, and so Putin was saying, look, these are not defensive; they're attacking missiles. That's a threat to us. And then so when you see Russia respond to this military buildup along their border, then they're accused of being the aggressor. Well, that doesn't make any sense. Russia, of course, you can't always take people's word for what they say. Maybe they're pretending to be some nice people, but really behind it's just a gimmick to lull us to sleep so they can attack us. Well, look, I could be wrong, but I don't believe that for a second. And I really believe that they want peace and they don't want to attack anybody. And they've gone on record saying that, and they've gone on records like a few years ago. Putin came out and said, how Europe and America has left their Judeo-Christian heritage behind. And what they're doing now is so immoral. It's an embarrassment to their Christian heritage. That's amazing. That's an amazing indictment coming from an ex-communist country like Russia. And then just yesterday they were coming out warning that really, he says, so if we did get nuked, we'd go to heaven, but you would be destroyed before you would have time to repent. And that's called a mechanism. They call it the dead hand. Which means that, say, like, even if they are nuked, their missiles will go off automatically, even if nobody's there to send them off, and it will destroy the origins of where these nukes had come from. So there's some real serious things that we need to pray about, and it's I don't think Putin comes out with that yesterday, and Lavrov put out these warnings. Without saying that. And then there's this other American guy. He used to be an envoy to the Middle East, and he was saying he's been, in Israel and things like that. And he believes that Israel will take out these missile defense system that Russia's put in Syria. Well, if they would do that, they may not survive, because these missiles are extremely powerful. According to India, here's an unbiased source. India was shopping around for a missile defense system, and the military defense minister had said, the spokesman for their defense ministry had said that the best military anti-missile system in the world by far is the S-400 that Russia has. Now, Russia has several series. So Syria has the S-200, which is the older version. And so now they got the S-300. And just so you know, the S-300, 200, 400, 500, they go 700, and they even go up to 1,500. I believe, I can't see that anywhere on the news anywhere, but I believe that has to do with the range. So say if you've got an S-500, that means you can go 500 kilometers. I believe that's what it refers to. That seems to be the case. So he's got S-300 in Syria, and he's got, I believe, 3 of these packages. and they each have like 100 missiles each. So I believe Russia's just, and they said they're going to give them to Syria. By the way, they're already in Syria, and they're just setting them up, and it will take maybe 2 or 3 months, and they'll be ready to go. So they've got, say, at least 300 of these missiles that they could fire. If they set them up, say, near Mount Hermon, just outside the Golan Heights, they could reach the vast majority of Israel. I'd say everything up, to Jerusalem, and only a little bit south of Jerusalem, south of Bethlehem, and that they won't be able to reach, but they're able to reach everything there, which means any plane that comes up. Now, this week as well, you had American military going over to the Ukraine, and the Ukraine has really been replaced. They had a Ukrainian government that McCain had helped topple that was very pro-Putin, and they toppled him with an American puppet. And so now you've got this Ukrainian guy there in charge of Ukraine, and he's been showing and demonstrating their the S-300 system to the American how it can track planes, and how it can take down planes, so that American can build a defense against them. And also Israeli military was there as well in the Ukraine. That was just in the last few days. So this is taken very, very seriously. If it is truly like the best anti-aircraft system in the world, an anti-missile system in the world, so you could fire 70 Tomahawks at Syria, and every one of them will be taken down with this system. The system runs these rockets that fly at the speed of Mach 14, I believe. I've heard Mach 20, but that's what I heard. And so maybe some of the more sophisticated rockets can go that fast. An airplane, the F-35s that Israel has, they can only fly. By the way, Israel has the F-35s, which is the latest, aircraft that America makes. And they fly at less than Mach 2. And so if you've got a missile that can fly it to Mach 14, you can't outrun it. I mean, it's going to be flying 7 times faster than your aircraft. You got no chance. And it's very, very agile. So it's going to find you and take you out. And of course, Israeli pilots, they're very, very skilled. And they're not going to just go in there willy-nilly, unprepared. But it sounds like from this American expert who's been in the Middle East and Israel, he believes that Israel will take out these sites. I'm saying if they do that, that could start World War III. I'm not saying it will, but it's a possibility, because if it's going to take out, maybe Israel will fire missiles from a distance, and the missiles will be taken out before they can destroy the site. That's what I believe will happen. Israel has some very sophisticated equipment. I don't know what Israel all has. Maybe they got something, America too, and they got lasers and all kinds of stuff, which is pretty powerful. But this system is extremely powerful. So the S-300 is not the same as the 500, but it doesn't matter, because you don't need to go 500 kilometers when you're just in Syria and your neighbor is Israel and you're being attacked by Israel. An S-300 is perfectly fine. That is more than powerful enough to protect your country. And Russia put them there not to protect Syria so much as to protect their soldiers, because Israel kept on bombing Syria positions, and it cost the lives of 15 Russian soldiers. So they're not doing it to antagonize Israel, because they were going to move these S-300s in 2014, and Israel asked them not to, and so they obliged. But then last month, Israel violated the terms of agreement with Russia, and they made this attack on Syria, and all these 15 Russians died. So Israel brought this on themselves, and trust me, if Israel does the wrong thing, I do not expect God to protect them, and they may pay a big price for it. So what I'm saying is we need to pray that peace prevails. There's a lot of things to pray for what I mentioned today with the Gaza Strip and the Palestinians there. And I believe, we can avert all of this through prayer and fasting. And so we've got a lot of things to pray for. And then, of course, with the volatility of NATO in the Middle East, but Lavrov was, basically warning NATO not to go into a nuclear war with Russia. So there's, because you got people like France threatening, to take out Syria, and they want regime change in Syria and stuff like that. There's some real serious things going on, which is not right. And then, of course, I didn't go into. I was going to mention that. I was going to mention what happened with this thing. So just in closing, with this Turkish murder. So what happened was you've got this this crown prince, and it looks like his bodyguard was one of these 15 that were involved with this murder. And what they did was, you can look it up on YouTube. It's rather gross if you ask me. And so what they did was they murdered this guy, and his fiance was in a car waiting outside the Saudi Arabian embassy in Turkey. And she was told that if I do not come out, then call the prime minister's office of Turkey and let them know that I didn't come out. So apparently he had an Apple Watch, and he must have turned it on. And so he was broadcasting everything that happened. And so Turkey had said they had an audio and video recording of the events, and they shared it with the United States. Now, Trump is on record as saying, listen, if you were involved with this, we'll put sanctions on you. To which immediately what happened when Saudi Arabia heard this, the crown prince put out in the news media, whatever is in the news media in Saudi Arabia is pretty horrific. It's always controlled 100% by the crown prince. Nothing gets out there. It's a real dictatorship there. And so what happened was he said that we would retaliate. We'd start buying things from Russia instead of America. So Trump was saying, well, we could lose our $110 billion deal, weapons deal. Well, there's supposedly some of the numbers are saying it could be as high as 300 or 400 billion in trade with Saudi Arabia. But if you've got a guy, a crown prince, who's going out there and he is just doing these kind of things, that is so barbaric that no United States corporation will want to do business with a country that does that kind of thing. But to put things in perspective, in the last elections in Mexico, right across our border, there were over 100 murders of candidates, political candidates running for office. 100 of them. And this Washington Post journalist, he was Saudi Arabian. He was not an American citizen, but he was working for the Washington Post as a journalist for many years. And he used to work with Osama bin Laden, which makes me think that he's a CIA operative, which he probably was. And it's really strange that the deep state, or let's say the left, is really pushing Trump to put sanctions on Saudi Arabia. You don't even have the facts. Lindsey Graham comes out and says, oh, I'm never going to Saudi Arabia again. I can't believe what they did. Well, you can't say Saudi Arabia is guilty until you have the facts before them. They haven't even completed the investigation. And so Mike Pence would say, we'll give you 72 hours. You can't even do that. You can't say, oh, we're going to give you 72 hours to complete your investigation. Well, what if it takes 3 months? So again, it's just some real double standards. And Trump at least was saying, hey, yeah, we can't, in response to Lindsey Graham, he said, well, we can't find somebody guilty because they shouldn't be, they presumed innocent until proven guilty. And so he's kind of like pushing back against Lindsey Graham. Says, hey, they haven't been proven guilty. And so hold your horses a little bit. And so that's, there's a lot of things going on, which I didn't really get into, and they've been just going on and on about these things. And hopefully we got to pray that Trump gets wisdom from God to do the right things. Well, Shavua Tov, and have a wonderful Shabbat and Shabbat Shalom. And we'll tune into this channel next week, Thursday at 9 p.m., we'll do another News for Life program. Till then, we'll talk to you later.